Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. On this channel we talk about all things fandom and we talk about them in a positive way. If that's something that appeals to you, you've come to the right place and we are so happy to have you here. Today we're going to be talking about a movie that is beloved by millions, has its own fandom with people that just absolutely worship on the altar of this wonderful movie and its sequels. And so much so that it was actually respected by a president of the United States. However, that wasn't always the case. The movie was originally rejected by the studio 44 times. A record 44 times. I don't know if that's a record, but that's a pretty substantial amount of time to go through and be rejected before you get to be released as a movie, let alone to be the commercial success that the movie turned out to be. Of course, we are talking about Back to the Future. So first off, the things to note, in case you haven't seen Back to the Future, it follows Marty Mcfly, this teenage kid who ends up traveling back to 1955 in a time machine created by this crazy old scientist named Dr. Emmett Brown. He travels back to 1955, meets his parents, where he accidentally, after running into his parents, prevents them from falling in love. Therefore, he creates this temporal paradox where maybe he isn't even going to be around anymore. So what happens? Well, that's what we're going to jump into. Alright, so the concept actually came to Bob Gell when he was thinking about if he would get along with his parents. He found his father's high school yearbook and inspiration hit. He was like, would I have gotten along with my parents if I traveled back through time and was a student during the same time as them? And yeah, who hasn't had that thought? Now, the thing about that is that when he thought about this, he wrote the script. The script was amazing, right? And, or so, it seemed. I'm sure it went through numerous changes because all scripts go through numerous changes. However, what makes this really funny, the head of Universal Studios at the time, upon greenlighting the film, didn't like the title Back to the Future. He said that nobody would be interested in the least of going to see a movie with the words future in the title. And thus he suggested Spaceman from Pluto be the title. Even went so far as to suggest a line that says, I'm Darth Vader from planet Vulcan be changed to I am a spaceman from Pluto. Well, Steven Spielberg wasn't having this, but he didn't want to, make the guy mad, so he sent him a nice little thank you note, thanking him for the joke that it should be changed to Spaceman from Pluto, and the whole people don't want to see future in the title. Well, not wanting to seem like, like he was serious, the head of Universal Studios pretended like, yeah, okay, it was a joke. So the title stuck. When Lorraine allows, or when Lorraine follows Marty to Doc Brown's house, and they exchange that little awkward greeting, this is actually the only line of dialogue that Doc Brown and Leah Thompson have in the entire 6 movies. They have appeared together in 6 movies. And this is the only on-screen dialogue they've had. So 3 Back to the Future movies and 3 other movies they have shared together, and they've only ever had this one bit of dialogue. That's kind of cool. Now, the thing to remember is that this film was so popular that it was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Film Registry as being culturally historical and significant. This happened in 2007, that it was, it was an older movie now, but because of the impact that it had on so many fans, we got that wonderful thing. Now it's preserved forever. How cool is that? The sticker on the back of Doc Brown's truck, if you want to look for a nice little Easter egg, actually says 1 nuclear bomb could ruin your whole day. I think that's kind of a funny thing. Come on. For a movie that got rejected 44 times, it was also the top grossing movie of 1985. Thomas F. Wilson actually ad-libbed both of his catchphrases in the movie. So, like, you know where Biff has his little catchphrases, where he says, "Make like a tree and get out of here." And then the butt headline. Those were actually improvised by Thomas F. Wilson. Thomas F. Wilson actually has done a song about all the questions he has gotten over the years about starring in Back to the Future, because people always have questions. What was it like working with Eric Schultz? Wait, what? No, it's true. What was it like working with Eric Schultz, right? Eric Schultz was actually originally supposed to play Marty McFly. They wanted Michael J. Fox from the beginning, however, Michael J. Fox was busy doing Family Ties and couldn't get away. Well, eventually what happened was they hired Eric Schultz. Eric Schultz filmed actual scenes and can actually be seen at various parts of the movie itself. However, he was replaced in most of his scenes that show his face and everything. Well, all of the scenes that show his face and everything were replaced with Michael J. Fox, because Family Ties then allowed Michael J. Fox to come to do Back to the Future with the stipulation that he had to do it after filming on Family Ties. So basically, he had to work on Family Ties, then stay up and do Back to the Future, and he was living on virtually no sleep at all to do this. But I digress. Thomas F. Wilson also talks about working with Michael J. Fox and all the questions that people have about Biff in this wonderful little song that he made up to address all this. He also hands out cards to people that have the most asked questions that he gets. This way, he doesn't have to answer them. He gives them a card, thanks them for liking the movie, and says, "Guys, I'm glad you like the movie. Here's a card." Makes me kind of want to meet him, just like you get one of those cards. I mean, that's kind of a nice little cool thing to think about, isn't it? As I said, the movie is also respected by presidents of the United States. Ronald Reagan actually needed to review the movie for his approval, because you're talking about the President of the United States in the movie. And he ended up liking it so much that he actually is said, I don't know if it's true, but it is said that he showed it in the White House. And had a personal theater set up to show it in the White House. I think that's pretty cool. Doc Brown refers to gigawatts of electricity. This is actually from an obscure little measurement of electricity that was called gigawatt. Nowadays, it would be pronounced with a hard G. However, it's just the way he referred to it actually was probably a mistake, and they just kept it in. So gigawatts are not actually a thing. However, grain of salt in the long run of an iconic movie. Now, the to be continued was actually inserted on the end of the VHS. That's right. The iconic to be continued at the end of the movie was not in the theatrical release. This was actually for the VHS release, because by this time they knew they were doing Back to the Future 2, and boom. So that's why that went down. Now, ironically, they didn't intend for Jennifer to be in Back to the Future 2 as a main character. And this is why when we see her get into the DeLorean, she is knocked out and left. It wasn't that they didn't want her in the movie. They just kind of had plotted it out a certain way. They didn't know what to do with her once the movie started. So Back to the Future 2 starts off and she goes and gets knocked out by Doc. She gets tranked so that she doesn't see herself in the future and cause a paradox. Now, that's the whole thing with it. The paradox is the key thing. There's a whole lot of iconic scenes in the movie that focus on Marty Mcfly and how he causes his parents to not meet, not fall in love. Well, not meet is not the right word, because they really do meet in the movie. However, they kind of imply that they need to fall in love or he's never born. And apparently there's only one time this can happen, at the Fish Under the Sea dance. No, it's the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. And because of that, he just cannot and will not be born. Now, a little bit back to the whole Thomas F. Wilson thing. He has actually gone on record as saying that he did not really enjoy working with Eric Schultz because he felt that he was a little too into character. And he played this character really dead serious, so he tended to kind of stay in character almost at all times. And since Marty Mcfly was being bullied and all that, he really tried to do it so that he was fighting back with the whole thing. So he would come across as really hostile at times. There's a rumor that he may have even hit Thomas F. Wilson in the scene. I think Thomas F. Wilson has addressed this, but I remember seeing the interview in which he did. He also has said that what made it really weird is the only time that he broke character was to flirt with Leah Thompson. But that's all we have to say about Back to the Future. Now remember, To Be Continued only appeared in the VHS. So when Back to the Future 2 came out, Back to the Future 2 picks up where the last one left off with Marty McFly and Jennifer looking at the car. Hey, spoilers, but this movie has been out for so long, and nothing I can say can really take away from the iconic nature of this movie. So while I tend not to do a lot of spoilers in this movie, I will kind of make that exception. So if you haven't watched the movie, definitely watch it, and you're not going to be missing anything by listening to me review the movie and give you a few things that happen in the movie. It's just not going to matter once you watch the movie. So it picks up where the last one left off with Marty and Jennifer looking at his brand new car. Everything's wonderful again. And wouldn't you know it, Doc Brown pulls up and he says something's got to be done about your kids. So they go to the future to 2015. And what do we get? Well, we get flying cars, so the DeLorean can now fly. We get hoverboards, which I totally wanted as a kid. And we get all this stuff, you know. It's just crazy. But here's the thing. Here's the thing, people. Michael J. Fox has gone on record as saying he didn't even know there was going to be a sequel. You know how he found out that there was going to be a Back to the Future sequel? He didn't find out from the writers, the directors, the producers, the studios. He actually found out when he watched the VHS, and the words on the VHS tape said, "To be continued." I think that's pretty funny. Back to the Future 2 also marks the very first film in which Elijah Wood, who would go on to play in Lord of the Rings and several other films, ever appeared in. My personal favorite Elijah Wood film has to be Good Son, with Macaulay Culkin playing the evil kid. I don't know why, that movie just always stood out to me. I guess I like evil kids in movies. I don't know why. There's nothing scarier than kids in horror, and you get someone like Macaulay Culkin playing the evil kid. Wow. But Elijah Wood would do his first ever movie playing one of the two kids playing a video game in this movie. Now, this film was in fact filmed back to back with Back to the Future 3. And so, you know, they had that going on. Now, what makes it really interesting about this movie, however, is the whole Crispin Glover thing. You've kind of heard me talk about this maybe once or twice before. The reason I talk about this a lot is this is something that really does impact the entire film community and several fandoms going forward. The reason this affects it is for this reason. When Back to the Future 2 came out, Crispin Glover hadn't agreed to be a part of it. And because Crispin Glover hadn't agreed to be a part of the movie, they chose to instead recast him with this one comedian. Now, Jeffrey Wiseman, I believe, is the comedian's name. And the thing of it is that Crispin Glover doesn't have a lot nice to say about the guy, but why would he? This guy essentially replaced him, took his look with some latex makeup and stuff, and pretended to be him. I don't think at that point, if somebody stole my identity to that level and pretended to be me in a performance, that I would be too happy with him either. Crispin Glover goes on to say that he did not like the guy's performance at all, that he wouldn't have made any of the choices the guy made. However, there's a lot of things that went on there. He says that they lied to him, that he was misled, that, you know, it wasn't a money issue or anything like that. I don't know. We really can't speak on that. We only have what Crispin Glover says. Crispin Glover successfully sued the studio, and thus we have this law in effect that says that you may not use an image of a person without their consent in film. So what's this mean exactly? This means that if you're looking at, we'll take the Star Wars thing again with Mark Hamill, because that is essentially the perfect example here. People were saying when this happened that they didn't like the CGI used to do Mark Hamill's face. Well, the problem with this, my friends, is simple. When Mark Hamill is doing his whole thing there, he's a lot older. They had to make him look younger, which means they had to use what they had, which was some CGI effects. A lot of people asked why didn't they deep fake him. Well, if they deep faked his image, then they fall into the same trap of what exactly this law is with Crispin Glover. Essentially, that you can't use their image without their permission. So you see why that works. And deepfakes are provocative anyway, because they can make people say things that they never would have said. So you see all the ones with George Lucas actually saying how much he hates Star Wars. And some of that is deep. Well, all of that, if he's outright criticizing, hating Star Wars and the fans or whatever, or saying bad things about Kathleen Kennedy or anyone else, is essentially going to be a deep fake. And this presents a big problem because it does allow people to say things they wouldn't have normally said. And that's the problem there. So Crispin Glover did not appear in this movie. He was replaced and sued the studio and changed the way film is done forever. Now, that being said, the character in the movie of George Mcfly does not appear in part 3, and we'll do more on that in a little bit. The movie goes on to have old Biff from 2015 actually steal the time machine, take it back to back to 1955. And why? Well, it must be some sort of marked place in time, you know. Doc Brown believes it could be a place where it's sort of like this convergence where all things sort of matter, and, you know, something along those lines. And old Biff gets his cane stuck after giving himself the copy of this book that Marty McFly was going to take back, because why can't we profit off time travel, right? This doesn't happen. Instead, old Biff vanishes. There's been a lot of questions and concern over why old Biff vanishes, so we're going to try to address that in a little bit, possibly in this. So here's the thing. The movie itself becomes very great for what it was doing and presented us with this really great vision of 2015. However, 2015 came and went, and we didn't have flying cars. We didn't have that stuff. Okay, so then we jump in from there to Back to the Future 3, where Marty has to go back to the Wild Wild West to help Doc, who got caught in time. So, in true Marty McFly fashion, he uses a different name when he travels back in time. So this time around, he actually uses the name Clint Eastwood. Now, ironically, Clint Eastwood had to approve the use of his name. What is even more funny is this is actually foreshadowed right before he travels back to 1885 when he's in the drive-in with Doc Brown. And he says Clint Eastwood, and Doc Brown says Clint who? The movies that are actually showing at the drive-thru are Revenge of the Creature and Tarantula, both of which are early film performances of Clint Eastwood himself. Also, another note on that is that Clint Eastwood, in fact, would go on to use the same area that Hill Valley was in for his movie Pell Rider, which actually is the movie that knocked Back to the Future 3 from its spot in the box office. So how cool is all that? Now, in Back to the Future 3, he's traveling back to the Wild Wild West to get Doc. They basically managed to mess up time there too a little bit. The movie moves a little bit slower than the normal movies, but in a good way. Thomas F. Wilson got to play Buford Mad Dog Tannen in this movie, who we kind of saw for a very brief moment in Back to the Future on the TV prompter from the alternate 1985. And he looks drastically different because that was kind of a makeup test, as I understand, and then they determined what his look was going to be like in part 3. It was a little bit different. Now, the funny thing about that is he also did all of his own stunt work in the movie, so when you saw him riding the horse, he legitimately did ride the horse. Marty at one point throws a frisbee plate, a frisbee's pie plate, which later on in history would actually be the inspiration for the frisbee when it was thrown by students at Yale University. And that's kind of a cool thing to think about. The role of Seamus was in fact created for Crispin Glover, but we went through that. Crispin Glover wasn't part of it. And rather than have the guy playing him in the last movie come back, the role kind of just went to Michael J. Fox. This has always caused confusion among fans. You know, but that's the reason why that happened. Now, the drive-in in the movie that we spoke of just a minute ago was actually built just for the film. That's kind of cool because it was built just for the film. It makes for a really interesting thing to look at because drive-ins at this time were starting to not be as big of a thing. And now if you were going to do a drive-in in a movie, you'd almost have to build it from scratch unless you were in one of the very few areas where you actually could have a drive-in in existence. Now, there is a lot of really cool things to talk about in this movie. An awful lot. But, you know, that's for another time, maybe another place, another thing. No, who are we kidding? Clara Clayton, the role of Clara Clayton was legitimately created with Mary Steenburgen in mind. So it actually makes sure that she was the actress they intended for, and she's the actress we got. And I can't say how many times that happens in Hollywood, but if it's written specifically for someone and they get it, I always find this to be a cool thing. This film marks the only time that Doc Brown exchanges any dialogue with any member of the Tannen family in all of the films. I mean, wow. He interacted with Biff Tannen in the alternate 1985, but he didn't actually have any dialogue with him. Now that's crazy in itself. Michael Winslow of Police Academy fame is in this movie. Wait, what? Well, kind of. You see, Michael Winslow actually does the sound effects for when Michael J. Fox is doing Michael Jackson's moonwalk in the cafe. Well, in the saloon. And when they're shooting at his feet and he's doing the moonwalk, the sound effects were actually recorded by Michael Winslow, who played in Police Academy. That's really cool. The more you know, right? Doc Brown's wardrobe was actually inspired by The Wizard of Oz. That's right, The Wizard of Oz. Doc Brown's wardrobe in this movie was inspired by The Wizard of Oz. So the whole thing that you see was actually Professor Marvel from The Wizard of Oz. It was definitely inspired by that, and looking at it, you can really tell if you know what you're looking for. You've seen both of those movies. It's really kind of clever and cool. Now, the scene where Marty McFly is being dragged by a horse is another really clever little nod to another movie, because actually it's a go-kart that is dragging him, and this go-kart that's dragging him is actually the same go-kart that was used in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and then they painted over this go-kart for Who Framed Roger Rabbit to make it Benny the Cab. Only in this, you have the horse, and you see Michael J. Fox being dragged behind it. That horse, when you cut to Michael J. Fox, isn't a horse. It's actually the same go-kart that was used to make Benny the Cab in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Now, the bandana that Doc wears in this movie is actually the shirt that he wore in Back to the Future 2. And a lot of people do know this. However, a lot of people also make the comparison that if you look on his shirt, it actually has trains on his shirt, which simulates the fact that they will be making a train time machine, or that this will have a lot to do with trains. So that is kind of a very cool thing to think about as well. When another thing, when Doc Brown blows the whistle for the train, he exclaims that he's wanted to do that his whole life. This line is also said in another Robert Zemeckis movie, Polar Express, when the little boy blows the whistle and says the exact same thing. Now, Ronald Reagan was also offered a role in this film, but had to turn it down. He kind of reluctantly turned it down, and I wonder if he actually regretted that. The editor of the newspaper of Hill Valley in 1885 is one M.R. Gell, a tribute to the screenwriter Bob Gell. So let's take a look at a little bit at their time travel methods. Time travel methods in movies actually change throughout whatever movie you're watching. For example, if you're dealing with the Time Cop movies, it's drastically different than it is even in the Terminator movies, even in the movie Millennium, which is a really weird little obscure movie we'll probably talk about at some point. But then you also have the Back to the Future thing, which implies that you can in fact create a time paradox. That time is not really set in itself, and you can go back and change something, therefore changing things and causing a paradox that will rip apart the very fabric of time itself. What makes this really a bit controversial among some fans who think of themselves as more scientific is this. And this is why you will hear people criticize the time travel in Back to the Future as unoriginal or as not quite accurate, because we have a bunch of theories out there that contradict that this type of thing can actually happen. The theory goes like this. If you could go back in time, and there's an old Twilight Zone episode, not from the original, but from the 80s version, that had Forrest Whitaker hosting. And Forrest Whitaker hosted this one Twilight Zone episode that dealt with baby Hitler. The plot consisted of this. This lady goes back in time. She's a nurse. She knows that he's going to cause so much pain. So what she does is she opts to kill baby Hitler, who hasn't committed any crimes at all at that point. So it kind of makes her a little bit questionable, I guess. But if you know he's going to commit all those crimes in the future, why wouldn't you try to stop him? Yeah. Okay, so she does. She takes the baby and she throws it in the lake. Well, unbeknownst to her, the other nurse, knows that she did this, okay? And she's like, oh my God, wait a minute. The parents are going to be so upset. The parents are going to be so mad. So she takes a baby from the hospital and replaces this baby. So this baby she takes from the hospital ultimately becomes baby Hitler. And that's kind of where that theory goes, that you can't go back in time and kill your own father, because if you go back in time and kill your own father, you'll come back to figure out that that wasn't your father after all. You kill your grandfather, that's not your grandfather, etc., 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 etc. It kind of puts this stop on everything. So you can't go back and legitimately change time. This is a method that a lot of people attribute to time travel that Back to the Future purposely ignores for a plot device, and a mighty good one at that. So in the Back to the Future time travel plan, you essentially have it to where you can go back and change things. However, when you go back and change things, you also change the present. You may change it in a better way like Marty does in part 1. You may change it in a worse way, like going back to 1955 for old Biff actually changes it better for Biff in 1985. However, it makes it very horrible for everyone else, as now Biff is running this great empire. He's the luckiest man alive. He's married to Lorraine, and everything else is like Biff's version of Las Vegas. So, you know, there is that. And then they go back to 1885, and they actually change the future again by saving Clara. And that's a wonderful thing, is that every time they go back, they might change time, but time kind of reflects around them, and ultimately they can fix everything they change if it messes up too bad. There's a really great little epilogue to the Back to the Future trilogy. The Back to the Future trilogy has, on the anniversary disc, it has Doc Brown Saves the World. This is actually Christopher Lloyd coming back to the role to correct the things that didn't happen in 2015. So essentially, you have Marty McFly and the whole flying DeLorean, you know, the hoverboards and everything that we didn't get to see. Well, Doc Brown goes back and he auto-corrects this, and he says, yeah, I had to fix a couple of things because they just went horribly wrong. Nobody should mess with time travel, blah, blah, blah. And it's a really great scene because it actually does incorporate exactly what we're talking about, that you can go back in time and actually change stuff to fix the stuff that you messed up to begin with. And that's the way Back to the Future has always handled time travel. People having a problem with this because they're like, if there's no consequences, how does it make any sense? Well, there are consequences to it. Consequences that maybe they haven't seen or maybe they don't know about. Thus, Doc Brown Saves the World becomes a very relevant epilogue to the entire trilogy. You basically have the scenario where you have a straight line for time. And for their timeline, it's 1885, then 1955, 2015, and right in the center there is 1985. Well, the timeline splits off in the year 1955 when old Biff actually gets the book. He creates an alternate 1985 in which if Marty suggests that they could go back to 1985, or they could go back to 2015. He's like, we could go back to 2015. We could stop old Biff from taking the book. Well, the consequence here becomes that you can't do that, because if you go to 2015 from the alternate 1985, it's going to be the alternate 2015, and you actually change nothing. So there are consequences within their own timeline, and it's these consequences that make the film as epic as it is, and actually do inspire a lot of people to write fan fictions and whatnot about the series. It's one of the things about the fandom that has become loved and enjoyed. So while it doesn't have what we always deem to be an accurate description of how time travel works, really I propose this question. How does time travel work? I know a lot of you are in different fandoms and stuff, and there's been numerous times when numerous people have been able to travel back in time and do something in various fandoms. Why not answer that in the questions below? In the comments below, I want to hear how you believe time travel works. Do you think that the time travel in Back to the Future's trilogy was accurate? What would you have changed in it? Just as a question. And what's your favorite time travel movie of all time? But hold on. I said I would address why old Biff disappeared, didn't I? Okay, so this is the reason that old Biff disappears in 2015. The simple reason is that he cannot coexist in this world because now he has created an alternate 2015 in which he is now not the Biff of that timeline. The Biff of that timeline is the Biff from 1985, the alternate one which he created. So he immediately just blinks himself out of existence upon coming back. He is allowed to come back to this timeline for the very simple reason that changing this timeline doesn't actually occur until after he leaves. So when he's able to come back and change the timeline and gets back to his own time successfully, what we are now seeing is the beginning of the alternate 2015. So if you notice, things start to take a darker look from that point on. Why are they taking a darker look? Because things are slowly changing around them as they are getting ready to leave. They get Jennifer and they get out of there. The reason they get out of there, they don't know yet. But if they had stayed, everything would have altered around them to this much darker 2015. A lot of people wonder about why old Biff disappeared. And if old Biff disappeared and blinked himself out of existence, then why didn't the future immediately change? Well, keep in mind, he had served his purpose. That Biff that traveled back is now obsolete regardless, because now this new alternate 2015 is on its way. The timeline auto-corrects itself there to actually make sure that old Biff would not be around for the alternate old Biff to see. Thus, he vanishes. I hope that answered a few questions about their time travel, about their methods, about all that. And if you're new here, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that little notification bell down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to leave a comment, and be safe out there.